was going to be a values-driven organization that was focused around the employee experience and then therefore the customer experience.
Welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. Glad there's this many people interested in this topic. So excited.
Anything I left out on your background that you think is relevant or that you want to share with the group?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, you got it right. Worked outside the business for a while, came in, variety of roles, married, 2 kids. Yeah, nothing new.
Awesome. Okay, I think when we start, we kind of rehearsed a little bit of this stuff, but can you give the group a background of Berry Companies? A little bit about the founding, location, size, things like that.
Yeah, sure. So Berry Companies was started in 1957 by my grandfather, Fred Berry, who many of you, some of you, if you've been around AED a while, will know his name. And so him and his brother Paul started the business. My grandfather was a Massey tractor distributor, so kind of in between the dealer and the manufacturer. And they bought out that level of distribution, and so he took some of that money to retire, and the other money he invested with his 2 sons, and they bought Sam H. Denny Tractor Company in Wichita, Kansas. It was in conservatorship at the time of the bank. The owner had died without a succession plan, and so he bought that. It had 40 employees at the time. I think it quickly became 30 employees after they bought it in 1957. And it's grown a lot from there. I know we'll get into some of the details now. We're between 57 and 59 locations, depends on how you count the corporate headquarters and things like that. About 1,300 employees. So that's kind of the major overarching history.
Cool. Lines, brands you are currently supporting now?
Yeah, we are significantly Bobcat. So we have 9 divisions, and there are 7 Bobcat divisions. They're kind of structured geographically. So like Bobcat of North Texas would be one division, Bobcat of Houston would be a division. So we have 7 of those, and then we have the Komatsu division, which is Berry Tractor, which is the original business. Now sells mostly Komatsu, and that's in Kansas and Springfield, Missouri. And then we have a lift truck business as well that does Hyster-Yale forklifts in the state of Kansas. So of the 57 locations, about 49 are Bobcat, and then we actually have 2 random decorative concrete stores that are dedicated to that line of business as well, one in the Rockies and one in North Texas. So that's kind of the breakdown by division.
Cool. Okay, so you guys have kind of an interesting ownership model. I think there's components of Fred's philosophy, alignment with business. Talk to me a little bit about what that ownership model is, why you think it uniquely supports the organization.
Yeah, sure. I think to go there, I'd have to start with kind of Fred's thinking when he got into the business. Fred, you'll hear him say often, in fact, we just heard him say it to some employees, his original goal getting into the business was to make what he would call a Christian statement in the workplace. And that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but what it meant to him was that it was going to be a values-driven organization that was focused around the employee experience and then therefore the customer experience. So the way that played out in our ownership structure was Fred was a steward of that ownership. And so he passed on the significant portion of his ownership in the company to my father, Walt, and to my uncle, Dan. Dan's no longer in the business, and Walt is the majority shareholder today. And that's the goal moving forward through the generations on to the next generation as well, was that Walt would pass it down and we would be stewards. But in looking at the functionality of that, it's not as sustainable as you might think for basically tax implications, estate tax laws. Plus, you have to recapitalize the business every generation, come up with cash to buy out the leader, and then that has to happen about every 30 years, and that's expensive. So we were trying to think of alternatives that fit our stewardship model, and the alternative we came up, we actually originally called it the blob, or my younger brother, I call him my little brother, but he's bigger than me, I called it the generational wealth bomb. And so what we've decided to do is to take a significant portion of the financial ownership of the company and set it aside into a charitable trust. And that trust will be perpetual, so it'll go beyond the generations. And that trust will be managed by family members. But in the event that the company were sold or a division were sold, we would not be able to directly benefit as family members. That would go to charity. So to retain control of the company, we have a dual class structure. So 10% of our shares actually have voting rights, the other 90% don't. And so we will retain enough of those, so let's say 6% of the total, 60% of those shares to retain control of the company. And then we'll retain enough non-voting shares so that we could swap out with whoever the leader is that has those controlling shares as generations progress. We can swap those shares, but then the rest will be set aside for that charitable trust in the long run.
Awesome. How do your employees figure into that whole ownership?
Yeah, our employees, it is a surprise and somewhat unique. Our employees are a much bigger part of the company than people would realize. About 40% of the company is owned by employees. And there's two kind of classes that they have. One is our ESOP. It's an employee stock ownership plan. It's not your classic ESOP. It's more of a retirement plan that we have for them. And so each year we set aside a portion of our profits. The total pool is 15% of our profits, and that goes to three different things. But one of the things it goes to is to gifting shares to our employees. So each year some set of employees retire. So the company buys back their shares, giving them the cash value of that. And then we take those shares and we gift them to all the rest of the employees that still work there, which includes the new employees as well. So that makes up about 20% of the ownership of the company. And then after 5 years in the company, any employee has the opportunity to buy shares in the company that they want at an annual price that we set based on our book value. And so a lot of employees do that. So we have well over 100 employees that have bought shares over the years. So some of them have been around so long, they were actually gifted shares years ago by Fred. So we have 120 some employees that own shares that way, and that's another 20% of the ownership. And then the remaining 60% is owned mostly by Walt, but some other family members as well.
Okay. And so in this kind of concept today of employee and customer experience, what do you think the benefit of having employees as owners in the businesses?
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits. In fact, ESOPs are becoming kind of a trend lately, even especially in our industry. You get a bunch of buy-in really early on. You have an obvious connection. Their outcomes are going to be tied to your outcomes. So there's often that disconnect between owners and managers. There's even a name for it called agency conflicts you learn in business school. And that is diminished because they are owners and they recognize that. And those ownership stakes that they have can become material, can become a significant portion of their retirement portfolio or basket. So it creates that buy-in. It makes everybody feel as if they're part of a bigger thing and they have a shared outcome together. And it's been that way for a long time. So I think that's probably the main benefit. I think the benefit that's kind of obvious, but it's just the financial benefit too. If you're growing and you're based in book value and you make money, the share price will go up. And so that has been a boon for a lot of employees, that the number can get big, and we like that. It helps them retire, and we want them to retire.
I'll throw a curveball. I didn't ask you this before. Is there a downside to it? So with people that are listening to this going, hey, listen, it sounds great, but I really don't want a bunch of people telling me what to do or telling me how to run things. Like, you just need to kind of do what you need to do and get the job done.
Sure. I think the answer to that would depend on the structure that you have. In our structure, those downside risks are limited by the way we've set it up.
Okay. 20%
of the company is not going to put anything at risk financially. The ESOP, they can't all come to it once and say, buy me out. In fact, Walt is the director of the ESOP, I guess you would say, so actually has control over those shares from a voting perspective. And then the other 20%, the biggest risk you'd have is that you'd have some concentration. Somebody would come and want to sell, and you'd have to cash them out, and you have to provide the cash. But at 20% holistically, and no individual shareholder has more than a couple percent, that's not going to sink your ship. So I think you can do things to limit those risks. When a holistic ESOP where the entire company is owned by people can end up with some timing issues related to, well, if a bunch of people want to retire and then the business has to fork over the cash, that can get hard. But with us and the limited amount that we do it, I don't see any big risks.
Great. We talked about Fred's leadership style and his theory X and theory Y,
Yeah.
And how that sort of feeds into this whole, ownership by employees and things like that. Talk a little bit about what that theory is and why it's important to your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the key as to kind of how our culture developed into what it is. So Fred graduated from business school before buying this company.
Not just business school.
Yeah, Harvard Business School, yes. And he learned there a bunch of things to run a business, but one of the things that he really gravitated towards was this theory of management. It was theory X versus theory Y, and you can still Google this and find it online today. And Theory X is kind of the traditional standard 1950s model of authoritative approach, command and control. I'm going to tell you how to do it, you're going to do it this way, and if you don't, there will be consequences. And Theory Y was the participative approach, which is I'm going to give you a lot of freedom, and I'm going to show you what I want. I'm going to tell you the outcome that I want. I'm going to give you the freedom to achieve it how you want. You're going to make more mistakes, but we're going to get better outcomes in the long run. And he really gravitated to that. And he likes to joke now that he kind of gravitated it for selfish reasons. Well, it meant less work for me, which is somewhat true, and I think one of the side benefits of it. But it means that our employees have a lot of autonomy, and that's baked into our culture. We have 9 corporate values, one of which is autonomy. I'm sure we'll get into some of the others. And so we want the people closest to the problem making the decisions, and that's what Theory Y means. And you certainly give advice, and you have controls on the edges, fences that you keep them in, so that you can say you can make a decision within this range, but you want that range to be wide. So that was always his approach, and we still stick to that today. He still talks about Theory X and Theory Y often.
That's great, thanks. Profitability, how important is profitability at Berry Companies?
Yeah, I was thinking this after our original conversation. It's important. It's really important, but it is not the most important. Profit is required. So without it, you don't have a sustainable business. You have to invest to grow. Profit's even more important when you need to grow because you have to have cash to do those things. So it is definitely important. But there are other things that go along with profit. In our vision statement, we say things like, we will sacrifice short-term gains for long-term rewards at every opportunity. And our profit motive is also built around sharing it with our people and sharing it with our communities. And that's really important. There's a whole history to profit, from original corporations back years and years ago, like the Dutch East India Company, all the way up through Milton Friedman age of profit is key and shareholderism is all that matters, now to this world of kind of stakeholderisms, and there's more to care about than profits. The way I would summarize it today, profits is like the scoreboard. So you look at the scoreboard and it tells you whether or not you won, but you don't manage it. You don't go back after practice after losing a game and say, well, today we're going to practice scoring more points. That's not a way a good coach goes. He goes back and says, we're going to practice passing and dribbling and shooting and free throws and those things. So you practice behaviors. So we don't manage profit in that way. We manage the behaviors that we want to see, communication. We look at those things through customer surveys. And profit is certainly the outcome and necessary, and we want a good return, and we get a good return. But there are other things that you have to keep in line to make sure that profit is sustainable.
Great. I think the pandemic was a really interesting time for everybody, where you saw kind of a bunch of different stuff. When you think about Berry Companies, what sort of experiences did you have with employees through the pandemic, and how do you think your level of engagement or involvement with employees either helped or hurt your ability to manage the pandemic?
Yeah, the pandemic was crazy. And one of the things that we certainly realized was that our employees are extremely resilient. We were amazed at what they would do. We had to close multiple stores because we didn't have enough employees to open. People would come in from far away to open the store and do business however we had to, curbside pickup, all those things, plexiglass everywhere. They were amazingly resilient and flexible, and we really appreciated that. We both had to show each other a lot of grace, mostly them showing us grace. As leaders, there was a lot of conflicting information coming out, and Stephanie, who we called the COVID Queen, our chief people officer, had to manage that. So each state would have different requirements, and we had to make sure we were following those requirements, but also make sure that we were trying to follow the facts and not just the rumors and such. So we made mistakes. We did things that people didn't like, and some of the things people didn't like weren't mistakes, they were just required. And our people showed us a lot of grace in that, and we wanted to make sure we communicated that we needed that grace and that we would show them grace as well. So there was a lot of extra corporate communications during COVID. Walt would send memos from Walter Berry, kind of giving updates periodically about what we were trying to do, how we were trying to balance everything. So we learned a lot about our employees, and they were very gracious to us. We also learned something that changed and is still different, is that our employees have a different mindset now. Their turnover went up. People changed jobs, changed careers. All of life was in question, so I might as well do something new, or I'm moving across the country, or my wife is moving for a new job, so I'm following her, whatever that would look like. So we're still dealing with some of those shocks as well, caused by COVID, where people made changes that they didn't used to make because so much in their life was up for grabs. So, yeah.
With so many employees, such a large organization, a lot of kind of philosophies, ideologies, trying to build a culture. I assume that you have a lot of processes in the organization to make sure that people understand how to do their job, they kind of live the culture. Can you talk about some of the different processes or approaches you have to make sure that everybody's sort of singing the same song?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about employee and customer experience, we would summarize that all in one thing, in culture. And we use a framework that I think is really useful and valuable that many of you will have heard of. It's from a famous book. Jim Collins talks about it. It's called the flywheel, which it's not really that novel of a concept. It's really just a virtuous cycle or network effects. Google's the famous one. You search Google because it gives you great results, and every person who searches Google gives Google better results. And so the more people who search it, the better results, which means more people will search it, and it just builds on itself. And so the flywheel's that concept. And in our flywheel, you're trying to say, we're starting here, this causes this, and it's a causal cycle all the way back around to the top. And ours starts at Berry Companies with employees and the employee experience. Because if we give employees a great experience and they love what they're doing, they're going to turn that into a great customer experience. A great customer experience is going to be turned into a long-term customer relationship, which we think is a key step. Every business says that, but relationship really matters in our business. I know we'll get into more of that later. That's going to be turned into good, profitable results, which is going to be turned into reinvested into the company, mostly in our people, also in infrastructure, buildings, those types of things that you have to invest in. So that is our cycle. And to follow that cycle, we try and put a lot of things in place. So the ESOP, the employee retirement plan, would be one of those things. We're going to take a portion of those profits, we're going to reinvest that back into the employees. We're going to take a portion of profits and give it to the community, whatever that is. So those are some of the things. We also have things like our leadership development program, which is a 6-week, it's over 9 months. We have 6 classes. They're each 2 days long. One of them's 3 days long, and they cover different topics from HR management to communication to business acumen. We do a business simulation in there. And we have 20 people that go through that every year, at least one from each division, most of the time 2 or more. And that really helps spread the culture. Because when you talk about your values, the 3 main ones we talk about are grace, humility, and honesty. It's just talk. They have to see it in practice. And so when they see leadership, which leadership is who runs LDP, it's not bringing in outside speakers, it's us, getting up there and saying these things and talking through scenarios and saying, this is how we would handle it, or how we've handled this situation in the past. They see that it's real. Once they buy that it's real, they don't just go back and tell people, they go back and act it out. And when they act it out, it becomes real for everybody else. The other thing I would add, and this is, I don't want it to sound like we've got it all figured out. We don't, and you know that we don't. Culture is very local, extremely local. So the culture is really set at the branch level or the division level. So we're going to rely on our division managers, some of which are here, to really set that local culture and to do it through their branch managers in a lot of cases. And we fail at it. Plenty of places. Not every place has the same culture. I was a part of that failure. I remember when I was a service manager and I had a technician that was a hothead. And that we got into it in my office, and I lost my temper at him. His name was Garrett. He was hard to work with. And that was not me expressing our culture perfectly at that time. So it takes a lot of consistency, and we don't do it perfectly, but a lot of that local control means that culture has to happen in the local stores as well. So I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, and I think I want to say something, as we were prepping for some of these discussions, one of the things that I said, hey, Adam, I want to talk to you about customer and employee experience. And Adam said to me, well, actually, I need to turn that around. It needs to be employee and customer experience. And I was like, no, it's customer and employee experience. So it was interesting. The philosophy here is, hey, we start with the customer and then we start with the employee and then we move to the customer. And I think that we've talked about the employee first here for a very specific reason, and it kind of, to your point, contributes to the relationships long term. So just a really important thing, I think, to take away from this. So let's say you're in the audience today and you're hearing this, and maybe you don't have a culture like this, but you align with what you're saying, and you're like, I think that's great, but I don't know where to get started. What's one thing you might tell the audience of a way to kind of get started down this path of being maybe more employee-centric, or maybe, just a lot of the philosophies that you espouse? Where's one place to get started?
Sure. I think the obvious place, many of you have already started and are certainly past this step, but it's always good to rethink it, would be to to start with a vision, mission statement. If you don't have one, you certainly need one. If it's not written down, it's not real. You can say as many things as you want to say, but they're just words. And writing it down gives you something to point to say, this is who we are. You hear a lot of companies talk about their culture and how important it is. But when it's on paper, it's on purpose. If it's not on paper, it's not on purpose. And people will feel like it's just luck. Like that's that guy treating that guy well, good, but that's not the culture, that's just a situation. When it's on paper and you can point to it, it becomes real. It becomes something we should all do together. So I would start with a vision statement. And the other thing I would say, there's a bunch of risks in doing a vision statement. The feeling as a leader when you sit down to write a vision statement is it's very hard to go judge yourself. And half of the vision statements out there written are aspirational in nature. That's not who you are. Those aren't your actual values. Those are what you wish your values were. Those are what you want them to be, but they're not there yet. So be careful. Don't get too aspirational. If you say this is who we are, and that's not who you are, people aren't going to buy in because they're saying, well, that's not, I mean, they wish they were that, but that's not who they are. So you have to build into it, I think, in some ways. That comes from Patrick Lencioni, which if you haven't read, he's a great author on these types of topics. Don't make them too aspirational, and don't just pick somebody's you like off the shelf. It has to be yours. It has to be tied into who you want to be, to how you do business, to how you want your employees to be. It's got to be personalized. If you pull something off the shelf, people will realize quickly that it doesn't actually embody who you are, it embodies who you wish everybody else was. So I guess that would be my one piece of advice.
Yeah, and I think that to add a little comment to that, I've seen a lot of people take mission and vision statements off somebody else's website and say like, hey, this looks great, like let's get it done, let's put it on our site and let's roll. And now you have one, but I don't think there's not buy-in, there's no meaning behind it. And so just be aware that while that is a really easy way to get one up on the site and rocking, it doesn't really get you where you need to go. So,
and it's not a checklist item. You're not ever done with it. Once you check, you have something that you start with, but you're going to have to constantly talk about it. There's a lot of research that says you got to say something 7 times before people believe it. This topic is in that category. They have to hear it from you 6, 7 times through all these different channels. They've got to see it. Then they'll begin to believe it, and that takes years to build. You can't just do it, say it's there, put it on the website, and move on. That won't work for very.
All right, let's talk about the younger generation. Everybody always loves this topic.
Yeah.
You're an example of the younger generation, right? You're coming into an organization, you're a part of the family, and there's a lot of challenges, I think, or a lot of perceived challenges with the older generation looking at the newer generation coming in, and frustrations and things like that. Tell me a little bit about what your experience on the employee side, how you're dealing with it, how you feel as a younger person coming into the business, and kind of give us that perspective.
Stephanie does a great whole speech on this. I think there is a lot of good things about how the younger generation thinks. There's a lot of negativity out there, but that negativity is overblown, even in all of our own heads. We all had, well, those who are older have, say, the younger kids, they don't have the work ethic that we have. They want things, they want all this flexibility, they want all these things. Well, those are all what your parents said about you, and that's just a natural cycle. It's less about the younger generation being that different and more just about people changing as they move through age. So kids these days, in my mind, they have life easier than you. You had life easier than your parents. That's a fact I'm not going to deny. It doesn't mean they're lazy, and it doesn't mean they're allergic to hard work. They are capable. And what's interesting is that they are extremely morally focused. They care about morality. They want the companies they work for to have a purpose that's bigger than just profit. They want that. And so they are looking for a place where they can build connection, not just a place that they can show up and do a job, which is different from the way things used to be. And we can certainly complain about that. That may help us get it off our chest, but it isn't going to help us run better businesses. So we have to be responsive to that in a lot of ways. And I will say this topic of generational differences, I think it is kind of useful, but not overly useful. I think it's more useful because it gives us a place to stereotype people in a low-stakes environment, and we don't get to do that very often anymore, which is kind of a good thing. We probably shouldn't. But this is one where we can and not get in too much trouble. So it's fun to talk about those differences, but how useful are they really? They're useful, but not as stereotypes. They're useful to the individual. So I would say overall, you still have to deal with that individual who's their own person and is not just the generation that they are in. Because we find a ton, Tyler Brake, which I'm sure he's somewhere in the room, has certainly been able to find a ton of young kids that have the work ethic of your 85-year-old grandfather, and they don't act like you expect from the next generation, and it works out very, very well. So I don't know, that's a lot, but that's where.
Okay, so how are you having to change your business to accommodate that? So they want to work differently, right? And everyone's like, well, they don't want to work. I don't think that's the case. So what are
Right.
you doing differently at Berry?
Yeah, flexibility would certainly be one of those things. Where we can provide it, we're a retail environment. Flexibilities cannot be given to every role, and we understand that. But where we can provide it, we will. A lot more feedback than we're historically used to. This once a year review is kind of dead. You have to do it more often. And it's not really all these little, you're not giving an employee a review every 6 weeks or anything. You're just constantly talking with them, checking in with them, giving them the feedback that they want. And yeah, they want to be a part of something bigger too. And they're going to have the weirdest requests. And they want autonomy. They want to be able to just say, well, tell me what to do and let me figure out how to do it. And that means they're going to fail. And some of them won't do anything, and you'll have to fire those people. But you do, giving them that autonomy and have to work it through a couple of people is going to be a better long-term outcome than telling them exactly how to do it. They're not going to be happy, and you're going to not have good long-term success.
So as we were going through this and practicing or kind of rehearsing a little bit on this, one of the things that struck me is this feels a lot like Fred's Theory Why, right? So Fred, decided way early, right, that he wanted to sort of appeal to the younger generation, and that more participative strategy really supports what they want from your organization, right?
Yeah.
So now you've got ownership, you've got alignment from a culture and a strategy perspective, and you have this younger generation that's coming in. Really feels like it all makes a lot of sense. What do you think made him realize early on that Theory Y was the right way?
I think two things. I think it plays to true human nature. Theory X is actually pretty productive for the way humans like to act, but it seems really productive because it's so rigid, and rigid structures always tend to work in our minds. I think it's that, and I think part of it has to do with the values that he had. If he's going to sit there and say, my values are grace, humility, and honesty, and then go around telling everybody what to do exactly how he wants it, there's not going to be a connection there. So it was part of just kind of who he is. And if you know Fred, you know his personality, he would have been a horrible Theory X manager. He's not like that. He's not direct. He's not going to be like that. That Sue plays that role, his wife. If somebody needs to play that role. So, that wouldn't have worked for him. So I think it fit who he was, it fit his values, and it happens to fit the way younger people want to do things these days. But I think that's because it fits human nature a little bit better than Theory X does.
Okay, so same question I asked before. Here you are in a situation, maybe you don't have an organization that is currently well suited for the younger generation. You're sort of frustrated by this desire for autonomy and decision making on their own and all that kind of stuff. But you're listening to this and you're saying, hey, I think it makes sense. I hear what Adam's saying. What are some of the steps that you might take to start to move your organization, or at least put a couple pigs in the water, right? Test it out a little bit to see whether it fits.
Pigs in the water. I haven't heard
Little
that.
toes, like piggies.
Yeah. I was picturing pigs, like bacon.
No, piggies.
I would say, I don't know that I have the best answer to this. I'll just tell you for me, what I've done that I think has worked really well is I don't do the big annual review anymore. It felt so high stakes. And no matter what structure you come in with, whether it's a pass-fail or a above average, below average, or a ranking of 1 to 10, the employee is so focused on whether or not they beat last year's score that they get nothing out of it. And so you could present them with a 7.2, and all they care about is that it's not as high as the 7.5 they had last year. And I'd always try and explain to them, well, my expectations of you change, as they should. You want them to, right? You want me to have higher expectations of you. And I never got anywhere because they were just focused on the score. So kind of eliminating that and moving to, I do weekly check-ins with all my direct reports that are not a review, but it's so much more often that feedback is there and I can provide them feedback, the stakes feel so much lower. And when the stakes feel lower, I can share with them so much easier. Otherwise, I built up all these things. I said, well, over this year, these are the things you've done wrong. And they're like, man, can you give me the example? It was like 6 months ago. And it doesn't ever feel like it goes very well. You leave frustrated that they didn't get the message you were trying to communicate. They leave frustrated that they didn't have feedback earlier on when it happened more direct. So I'd say breaking down your annual review into much more often check-ins that have a review component of them where you can talk directly to the person about their performance is important. I like to say, and I'm not very good at it, I like to say I like conflict. Don't avoid conflict. Conflict is awesome, so long as you do it healthy. And you know, I'm not saying I always do it healthy, but you don't want to avoid that conflict, and it's much easier to have it more often. It'll feel lower stakes, and you won't feel like you have to have this big, you know, outcome like an annual review feels like.
That's great. Thank you. You and I have talked about some of the challenges with hiring and attrition and things like that. One of the things that came up is you've had technicians and staff come up to you and talked about wanting to go back to get a 4-year degree. And you having conversations around kind of 2-year tech school or opportunities that exist within the dealership. What do you tell people in the audience around how to deal with employees that feel that, you know, they need to go back and get a 4-year degree, or, you know, as a way to kind of move up the ladder?
Yeah, I have so many stories of technicians that say that they want to quit to go back to school, and it always blows my mind because I'm like, you're going to take a 30% pay cut to go back to school. And what I think it's tied to is just that basic American dream narrative of, well, yeah, I'll make less money at first, but then I'll go up the ranks and I'll become management. Maybe one day I could be the whatever. It's aspirational. And aspiration is a good thing. But it's not necessarily applicable to everybody. So I'm sure we'll get into it, but in the tech world, specifically as it relates to techs and their desire to leave, Micro, if you haven't read Micro, you absolutely should. He's major voice on this. He's the guy that hosted Dirty Jobs, so he's a facial recognized, and he's spoken up about this often. But we have to kind of get rid of the stigma around the need of a 4-year degree to be somebody. And luckily, I think that is starting to change. There was announcements even this week that a host of major companies are eliminating the 4-year degree for a host of roles that they used to require for. Big names too, like JP Morgan Chase, and which is exciting to hear. I want to see more focus in this country on 2-year degrees. I don't actually really want to take any off the 4-year degree. We subsidize 4-year degrees dramatically, way more than we do 2 years, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Degrees are good. They're good for the individual generally. They generally pay off. They pay off for the economy. They're generally good, but they're not for everybody. Walt has a saying that not everybody can be a neuroscientist. Not everybody can be a rocket engineer, because we're not all capable of that. Some people are better suited to do these technical degrees. And then the other thing that I know we'll get into is pay. You gotta pay them. Until there's a premium to go do a 2-year degree and get paid more than a 4-year degree, people aren't gonna do it. So we have to, and right now we're at par, we're at parity. When you are a technician coming in, you are going to make about what somebody graduating from your average business school is gonna go make. About 60, 65,000 a year, depending on where you're at in the country, is about what you can make on average there. And there has to be a premium there. And I think our customers are willing to pay for that premium. Our customers have been willing to pay for that premium. Our rates have gone up. We've raised our rates to our customers at least as fast as we have raised technician pay. And we aren't getting a ton of complaints out of it because customers need that service. And guess what? They know how hard it is to go find that service in the marketplace by paying a technician to do it. So we've been able to raise rates faster than we've had to raise technician pay, which, yes, I'm sitting here telling you, we need to raise technician pay. We need to raise it faster than we have been raising it, to the point where it represents a premium over the alternatives. And when it does, people will be attracted. This is America still, and people do follow money, and will follow the market, and when the market's there, they will be technicians. Anyway.
So quick follow-up on that, tactical. Somebody comes to you, they say, hey, I want to leave for a 4-year degree. What kind of advice do you give the audience as far as how to address that?
Tell them to encourage them to research the facts on their own. And I would say the number one thing you have to do is you have to always be supportive. You have to say, if that's something you want to do, I will support you in that. That sounds counterintuitive. You might lose them, and that's fine. But you're going to lose them whether you tell them. If you just try and keep them, it's not going to help you keep them. They're going to make their own decision that's in their best interest. So tell them you'll be supportive of them in any way, shape, or form so that they can trust you. And when they trust you, make sure they know the other side of that equation, which is if you want to go back to school, do it. But it's hard work. It takes time. It takes money. There may be some debt. And when you come out, go check what the average starting wages are. They may not be what you think they are. And don't forget, we've given you pretty good raises over those years, and if those raises continue, you might be in a pretty good spot by the time you graduate from there in 4 years from your online degree. And most of them, honestly, I'm going to say they do end up leaving, but many of them end up coming back.
Great. All right, now we're going to transition over to customer experience. So we've kind of wrapped up a little bit on the employee side. Hopefully you got some good ideas around how to deal with employees, change cultures, things like that. On the customer side, how varied are Berry Companies' customers?
Yeah, broadly there's a bit of variability in there. On the Bobcat side of things, we're mostly construction customers. There's some ag in there, a lot less than there used to be, some landscaping and such. On the heavy side, also construction, but more focused on infrastructure, road building, etc. And then on the lift truck side would be warehousing, which in our markets would be aircraft manufacturing and food servicing. So not the most diverse set of customers, but there's certainly differential needs within that situation.
Okay, and how does kind of serving the customer experience differ? Is there significant differences, or are they mostly similar?
Very similar, yeah.
Okay.
It's your classic dealership environment, sales, rental parts service, and then supplies. Those are the same across all divisions.
And I think you've talked about the importance of the employee. Now we're talking about the importance of the customer. There's clearly a relationship that exists. You've talked about it, the relationship to serve your employees right, they'll serve the customers right. What are the unique processes and approaches that you use internally to sort of help the organization understand how to deliver that customer experience?
Yeah, sure. The key is that you communicate often about what your expectations are. So you have to train your people on the customer service experience you want. So we do customer service training. Stephanie's team does that for every employee. That's the other thing. We do it for every employee, even the ones that aren't customer facing. We require it to the chagrin of some leaders who say, well, I don't want to spare my technicians for this. The reason we do that is because we want every employee to know what the expectation is. Even if we don't necessarily expect it from them on a daily basis, we need them to know what the institutional expectation is. So certainly customer service training. But our key and our flywheel is if you treat the employees right and they are having a good experience, they're going to be more likely to treat customers right. And the key to this is autonomy for us. So we are going to let the decision maker closest to the problem make the call. And we think that that's really helpful for customers. What most customers hate, what you guys hate when you're customers, generally is policy. When somebody says, I can't do that, and points to a policy on the wall on the counter behind them, that never makes you happy. You never go, oh, yeah, I get it. You know what? I can't even believe I asked for that. It was right there on the sign. I shouldn't have. That's not the way it works. You say, no, it doesn't matter what the sign says. This is what I'm asking for is reasonable. And so we don't want to have a ton of policies. That doesn't mean we don't have rules and things that we live by, kind of frameworks that we live by, but we're not going to tell a person how to deal with the situation. It's going to be very circumstantial to the nature of the situation. So that person with the best knowledge to make that call is going to be the person in front of the customer. So we try to avoid the, I don't know, you got to talk to my boss situation. You can deal with it, and we're giving you the freedom to deal with it, and you need to do what's right. And Fred always used to say, if a customer does what they thought is right in a given situation, we're not going to punish them for it, even when they're wrong. And they often are wrong. I got plenty of things wrong in my time. Are there limits to that? Yeah. I don't get to give away $20,000 on that rental that guy, put in the flood. I don't get to just give that away. I'm going to talk to my boss about it. But when it comes time to talk to the customer, I'm going to be the one having the conversation because I have the relationship. And there are certainly times when it escalates above. But we want to give that decision-making power right to the person dealing with it in that situation. I think that's the key for us and a good customer experience.
Which fits really nice into the kind of the ideology, the philosophy of how you run Berry, right? That autonomy, that independence, kind of figure out how to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you measure the customer experience today, and what sort of changes, if you can give me an example of maybe a change that you've driven from that information?
Sure. We do customer surveys through this little company called Satisfied. So we do customer surveys. Every division, every branch, every department. That's really important for us to be able to compare how those results are. And plenty of takeaways. Most of the takeaways, thinking about this after our conversation, most of those takeaways are actually really localized. So it's more about, I have a problem with this guy or girl in this branch in this department. that may not be giving a customer a great experience. And generally a people change is what's necessary. It has highlighted some kind of higher level structural changes, like parts inventory availability has certainly been a problem this last year. That has showed up in our numbers, in our customer satisfaction numbers. So we need to respond to that as best we can. And that's kind of an everybody in this room problem. So there's certainly things like that. We can see in the surveys that communication in the service department is what matters. It matters more than price, it matters more than fixing it right. They want to know what the heck's going on, how long it's going to be, they want you to call them. So we can see that showing up in the data as well. But oftentimes it's really highlighting the fact that I have a people person in a specific situation.
Okay. I don't want this to be an infomercial for Satisfied, but why did you choose to work with us? And maybe I'd like to rephrase it too, like, regardless of who you choose, what are kind of the key decisions that you make when you're trying to find a partner in this area to help you assess the customer and employee experience?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I would say is that if you say the customer matters to you and you're not measuring it, you're lying to yourself. I don't mean to be rude, but that's a fact. You would never say that profit matters and decide not to calculate it. If you did, that would be kind of crazy. So you should measure it. And we did measure it for a long time. Like, if I was up here on stage a year ago, I would have been one of the people going, yeah, I don't consistently measure it. I think I know my customers think well of me, but I don't know. I haven't done anything about it. So I think you got to consistently measure it and measure it over time to know where you're at and how you compare it to benchmarks or standards. So what is Satisfied or any company like Satisfied offer? We think Satisfied offers it better, but they're going to offer you that benchmarking. So they have other people in the industry. They know what the averages are. They know kind of what your expectations should be about the outcomes of the individual metrics. They have the methodology down pat. Ryan's a nerd. Emily, they know the methodologies. So, and they customize the plan for us. We were really worried about, I'm going to annoy all my customers by calling them all the time, and that's a valid concern. And so we wanted to balance kind of statistical significance with annoying our customers, and they worked with us to do that. And then in this, Ryan had the opportunity to turn this session into kind of a standard infomercial about Satisfied, and he didn't. Instead, he decided to talk about the industry at large and employee and customer satisfaction as a topic, which I think is cool, because I probably would have got up here and done an infomercial for you, because we've been that satisfied. With Satisfied and what it's given us. You're passionate about it, and I think that passion shows up in your work, and I think that makes you guys an easy choice as well. But in general, yes, I think you have to measure. If you say it's important, you have to measure. And if it's not important, that's okay too. Decide what is important, go put that in your vision statement. But if it is important to you, measure it.
Thank you. So we've talked about younger generations on the employee side. Let's talk about on the customer side. So we're seeing these younger generations come in. They're your customers, they're buyers, they have different expectations. What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I'll get on my soapbox. I give this saying a lot, and I don't know why I feel so emotional about it. In our business, relationship matters. And I think that really matters for me to say, because everybody says that, and it frankly upsets me. Because in a lot of businesses, it doesn't matter. I don't have a relationship with Amazon. And it just so happens that anybody that asks to be a member of Amazon and pays $150 becomes a member. That's just the way it works. That's not the way it is in our business. Our customers, are in weekly into our store, and we do build relationship with them. We know them by name. They walk in, we know what machines they have. They don't have to tell us the serial number. When they call in, we first name basis. That's rare and unique. I don't have that relationship with the dealership I bought my car from. So I think those relationships are super, super rare in business. I say that only to say the younger generation, the things that they want from us, we'll know what they are, because they'll tell us, because they're in our stores all the time. So we kind of get that heads up, which is good. I would also say nobody's ever accused our industry of being leading edge. We're not in a technology way, and that's okay. That's good for us. That means we have time to react. So the younger customers, they do want things different, but it is taking time to build in. So what are those things? Certainly they want differential channels from what we're used to. Their sales process doesn't look like it used to. They don't just walk in the dealership or call you up, say they're in the market for this or that thing. They're going to do their research online. And hopefully, if you have a good online presence, that's a good outcome for you. They want to buy things on e-commerce, and they're going to want different products. They're going to expect more from the product. tend to be somewhat tech savvy because they grew up with phones in their hands, and so they're going to want some more of that tech in their machines as well, which is going to look like new technological innovations. I think it'll look like a lot of electrification, among other things, which you can go to other sessions about those topics, I'm sure.
Cool. You had a unique story of a deceased employee that kind of was important that you wanted to share. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I think I don't really know how it relates, but I think to me it's a microcosm of our industry and how we think about employees and customers. And it comes recent example actually out of our White Star division. We had an employee, a service manager for many years. His name was Mason, and he passed away driving to work. It was on a motorcycle and was in a wreck. And he was a beloved service manager, a really good guy, and we all wanted to go to his funeral, like all the employees. So what are you going to do? So they all want to go. You can't have a store open. So we closed the store that day, and we all went to the funeral. And what blew me away, what stuck out, that I think is very unique to our industry and our people, is we had 50 plus employees there, and that's expected though. We all liked and cared about Mason. But there was many customers there, and that is so unique. I can't think of a business I do business with where I'm going to the dude's funeral. That's really cool. And Mason was buried with his Bobcat hat in the casket with him. And I'm like, this is part of our identities, and that's not normal. I don't even know if it's okay. Like it must be, but it is unique, and I think that we have to keep that in mind, how much relationships matter in this business. And that matters with your employees, that mattered with Mason, and it matters with your customers as well. I think both of those things are equally important.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap. So truly appreciate the time that you've put into this, both before the show, prepping with me, and during this. Everyone give Adam a round of applause for